This sermon was recorded at the Church of Christ, Northwest Arkansas. We are Christians seeking to worship God in spirit and in truth, according to the New Testament. Come worship with us Sunday mornings at 10:30 at 1708 Elm Springs Road in Springdale, Arkansas.
I'm thankful for the opportunity to be together today and thankful for the opportunity to study the Word with you. I appreciate your love and your welcome. Those of you who are with us at the studies the last 2 days, thank you for your encouragement, for your patience, your interest in the Word. As Brother Jared said, we were studying about things about parenting, and those things tie into the pursuit of leadership. When you read about the qualities that a man must possess to be an elder, one of the things that stands out is the quality of his family life. And you read the same thing when you read about the qualities that a man must possess in order to be a deacon. You look at those things, and besides character qualities, you see things that relate to his family life. And so there's a very natural stepping stone from talking about a father-led home and transitioning from there to elder-led congregations. Because leadership in congregations by God's design is made up of people men in particular, who've proven themselves in the way they conduct their personal life, including their family life. And so this all ties together. And today we're going to study a little bit about the qualifications of elders and deacons. And we'll see in these qualities things that tie back into things that we studied together this weekend. And Tom Hicklin and I, Lord willing, will be coming up toward the end of the summer to spend some time with you. That is our plan, and we're working on making certain of those dates to the best of our ability. And when we make those visits, we want to come and talk to you about who you see in your future that appears to be developing a life of qualities and characteristics, including family life, that matches the things we're going to study today. And so part of the rhyme and the reason behind studying the qualifications of elders and deacons today is so you can think about these things and think about the people you go to church with and look for potential for the future. And you may not have somebody that you feel like today meets those qualities, or you might, or whatever, that's your conclusion to draw. We want to talk to you about the potential you see in your church family here. And our purpose is to gather anonymous data to be able to share percentages with your leadership team to help them to set goals and be intentional in the work that you do to continue that journey towards cultivating future elders and deacons. However quickly that may happen or however long that may take, it's not our purpose to try to come down to a solid number. Our purpose is to help you to continue to move in that direction. And I hope that that work can be a blessing for you. We have two passages of scriptures that speak of these qualities. One of them is 1 Timothy chapter 3, and one of them is Titus chapter 1. And we'll read both of these now to frame our study. So this is a true saying: if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and a snare of the devil. In Titus 1, verse 6 through 9, talking about the qualifications for elders or bishops, as they're also called in that context, he said, if any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. For a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word as he's been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. Now, the qualifications for the deacon in 1 Timothy 3, beginning at verse 8, and reading through verse 12. Likewise must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. And let these also first be proved, then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children in their own house as well. I want to make a brief observation here that he adds in qualifications for the wives in this pursuit of church officers when he said, even so must their wives. It is my conviction that that's talking about the wives of the men being considered in the context, and that is both elders and deacons. So, along with the qualities that the brother must possess to be appointed to this office, he's got to have good family life. He's got to have a good wife who meets those qualities as a Christian woman. So I'm just adding that in very quickly because we're not going to talk about that in detail today. What we're going to do today is try to just discuss these qualities, and we're going to lump them all together to just kind of help define what exactly does this mean. Because we face a challenge when we talk about these things. I can remember, I'm 62, so I've been watching life for a long time, and I can remember way back in the day hearing older brethren talk about that list of qualifications and saying, well, no man will ever meet those. Nobody can ever be that good. How much sense does it make for Paul to write Timothy a letter and say, here's the qualities you look for in a man before you appoint him as an elder or as a deacon? And oh, by the way, it's never going to happen. How much sense does that make? And when we read the New Testament, we don't have to struggle to find instances where men like Timothy went about appointing men to this work. Well, those guys weren't more perfect than we are. They didn't have some magic fairy dust sprinkled over them that made them somehow magically, spiritually strong, and then that ended in the first century, and now it's impossible. Imperfect men were able to meet these qualities. And so as I think about that, I understand why someone would look at this list and say, those are high standards. I hope in our discussion of these things today, you can see that these are lists of qualities that a man must meet, not a list of excuses to not have elders or a list of excuses to not have deacons. We don't want to look at these as disqualifications. We don't want to look at these and needle to the degree that it becomes impossible in our minds to meet this. We want to look at them within reason and understand the Lord means what He says. These are qualities that a man must possess. But we'll talk about how to understand those as we go through one by one. There are different ways you can group these. One way that it seems simple to me to group these is to look at the ones that pertain to a man's family life, the ones that pertain to his moral integrity, and the ones that pertain to his work skills. And you can scoot those around in a variety of ways. I understand this. That's just a way for me to conveniently break them down. So instead of going back and forth, verse by verse, we're looking at the qualities in these three groupings for the sake of having order to our study this morning. So let's talk about the family qualities. And right out of the gate, I want to tackle one of the qualities that's for me has been one of the most challenging things to properly understand. Husband of one wife. What does it mean that a man has to be the husband of one wife? Now, traditionally, that's been read by a lot of people as, well, that means he's never been married before. That's not what that says, but that's how I used to read it. Oh, that means that if his first wife died and he had to get married again, and then that's how he built his family, well, then he can't serve because he's not the husband of one. That's not what that says. And that guy that his wife died of cancer when their family was young, and so he did what a young man is likely to do. He remarried a good Christian woman and built a family and met all the qualities. You go to him the day you're asking the question, should this guy become an elder? And ask, is he the husband of one wife? Well, if he's not, how many wives does he have? You see what I'm getting at? I'll just tell you, I think I've looked at this with a slaunched eye. That means crooked. I've looked at this in a way that is not, and I was talking to a brother about this one time, and he said, well, but that's what it says. Just read it for what it says. I said, let's do that. the tenses that he uses does not express the idea having never been married before. It does not express that. It's looking at the present. Who and what is he as a man today? So if I'm going to try to be hyper literal in the way I read that, then I cannot look 30 years in the past. I've got to look today. Okay? What does the phrase literally mean? You know, in our language, we have a word for woman, and then we have a word for wife. We have different words to designate that. So I could talk about Tanya, my wife, and use that term so you'll know I'm talking about the one to whom I'm married. But I have the luxury, if I want to talk about another sister in the Lord that I go to church with in Oklahoma City, I can use the word woman to give you the idea she's a female, but she's not my wife. We have that. In the Greek language, they didn't have that. They had one word for both. And you look at the context to discern what is he talking about. And when we do that here and we just look at the literal meaning, if you translate that word for word from Greek to English, here's what that phrase says. One woman, man. Okay, so that guy I told you about whose first wife died of cancer when, the first child was a little baby, and, now she's gone, mama's gone, so he's going to go and remarry and find a good Christian woman to be a mother to this young child and to bear more children, okay? And you go 20, 30 years in the future and you look at him, he is a one-woman man. He's faithful to his wife. He does not have a roving eye. He does not have an unfaithful heart. And he has not been unfaithful in body. He's not gone out and cheated on his wife. This is a character quality that's displaying that he is devoted to his wife and he's not looking for opportunities to cheat. And you find that said with relationship to the elders and with relationship to the deacons. Now, let's look at this just a little more closely. I'm going to toss in a passage I don't have on the screen. There's a similar phrase in 1 Timothy 5 that's just gender flipped. And it's talking about widows who might receive regular help from the church. And he's giving the qualities that she must meet in order to be deserving of the church benevolently helping and supporting her. And you might remember the passage. It's the one that says, if she's got kids that are Christians that are taking care of her, then don't charge the church with her care. Let the family take care of her. But then it talks about a woman that doesn't have that, and so we're going to consider, do we benevolently assist her? And one of the things it says is she's got to be the wife of one husband, a one-man woman, if we're going to take the phrase literally. So let me toss this out here. Let's suppose we have a widow indeed, as is described there in 1 Timothy 5, that needs the church's financial assistance so she won't starve to death. And I'm going to plug a real-life story into this. This happened to a cousin of mine way out on the West Coast. She got married, had a happy marriage. Her young husband was a construction worker, and he died tragically in a construction accident. She didn't ask for that. It just happened. So she grieved an appropriate period of time, and then eventually she kind of pulled herself together and said, I'm young, and I want to be married and have a family. So she got married again. And she went on with her life. Now let's pretend that she, later on in life, her second husband dies and she becomes a widow indeed. And we're talking as brethren in the church about, are we going to help her? And someone says, well, she's not the wife of one husband because, that one died in a construction accident way back then. Do we really think the Lord put that in 1 Timothy 5 to get us to push that widow out and say, sorry, we can't help you? I know that was an accident, but hey, we're not, Is that really what that's saying? Or is that saying she's got to have this moral, ethical character quality that says she's a one-man woman. She is devoted to her husband and she does not seek opportunities to stray, physically or emotionally. Can you see that? I mean, that makes total sense. So let's take that and let's plug that back in here, and we've got our answer of what it means. I want to know, is he devoted and true to his wife? Is that part of his family life in order? Ruling well his own household. This is another challenge that we face. 1 Timothy 3 says, one that rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man knows not how to rule his house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Titus 1 says, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. Now, years ago, I looked at that, having faithful children, and I read that as all his kids have to be baptized. I'm not the only one that's read it that way. So is that saying then that all of an elder's kids have to be baptized before he can serve as an elder? What of a guy that's got a big family, like a lot of big families, and you've got older ones that have obeyed the gospel, and some of them are pretty young and they haven't yet? Are we going to disqualify him because, you know, I knew one guy was a church officer. They'd made him a deacon, actually. His kids were all good kids and well behaved and everything was great, and one day, surprise, we're having a baby. They didn't plan on that. They weren't expecting that. So are we going to look at him now and say, well, all right, he's no longer qualified, and kick him out of the deacon office? I mean, is that really what the Lord is telling us here? Let's just think it through. You know, one thing is I'm working my way through Scripture trying to understand. If I come to an idea about a passage, it helps me to ask myself, if what I'm thinking is true, what happens next? And if I do that with this quality here and say, well, all his kids have to be baptized, then what? Now we've got a guy who had a late in life surprise child, and all of a sudden he doesn't know how to be a dad anymore? Now, how much sense does that make? Well, but he says faithful children, and that word translated faithful means Christian. Well, it can. But you know what it can also mean? It can also mean just faithful to authority. Just like you might describe a friend who is a good and faithful friend. You're not trying to say they're a Christian. You're trying to say they have a quality of loyalty. So let's look carefully and see, is there anything in the text that tells me, does he mean Christian when he says faithful, or does he mean the kid is faithful to dad's rule? One of the neat things about the Bible is a lot of times when I'm locked in on one phrase and I'm vapor locked and I can't get off high center, if I'll just read a little further, I'll see some things that help explain it. Now, here's where I used to go with this. Faithful, all right, so they've got to be a Christian. Wait a minute. What if they've left home and then they leave the church? I mean, it's not enough for them to be a Christian. He's got to prove their faithfulness by the fact that when they grew up, then they stayed in the church. Well, and now I'm thinking of a young David Earl thinking through this. Well, he probably needs to marry a good spouse, because if you don't, your family life's a wreck, then you're not being true to the Lord. And that's because my parents drilled that in my head. You know, that I'm thinking, you see where I'm going with this? But the time I got done with the word faithful, all his kids had to be grown and married and have good families, and that's not what that text says. And one day I was looking at this, thinking about it, and it occurred to me, you know, the Lord does not need my help amending the rules. He does not need my help making this harder or easier. I need to just look at what he said. Well, what did he say? Well, he explained what he meant by faithful. Baptized and fully grown, and they've proven themselves. No, not accused of riot or unruly. That phrase explains this phrase. You can see that. Now, the neat thing about it is we don't just have to depend on Titus. I can go to 1 Timothy 3 to get a better idea of what he means. One that rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. Now, if I marry that to this idea that's rolling around in my head about faithful children, look at the conclusion I've come to. That means they're faithful to their father's rule. And they're so faithful that they're not out there running around causing trouble. Some kids do that. They get out and they break the law. They go stir up trouble in the neighborhood or whatever, and so that's a problem. But kids that are faithful to their father's authority because he rules well his family and he's got his kids in subjection, what does that show you? We're not just looking for a box that we can check or not check. We're looking for purpose. And what that shows you is he's going to be a good leader in the church because he's been a good leader in his home. And the Spirit inspired Paul to explain to Timothy the purpose behind this quality. And the purpose is you're looking at his family life to see how qualified he is to handle church life. Now, we've studied parenthood this weekend, and, it's evident from a biblical study of parenting that that's hard work. And that's really easy to mess up. I know, because I messed it up a lot. When I was, giving it all I had to do it right. It's just hard. Being a leader in a congregation is hard. You face tough decisions. I've got brethren that are good elders, and they're conscientious about their work, and sometimes we talk, and they'll talk about decisions they face, and they want counsel about, man, what do we do? This is hard. It's the same thing with raising kids. A man's parenting skills is a proving ground for his leadership skills at church. And that's the purpose of this. So I want to look at a man and say, is he a good dad? Now, you might say, well, if he's a good dad and he leads his kids well, they'll all eventually obey the gospel. Okay. One thing we've talked about this weekend is when our kids leave home, they're free moral agents. This didn't say he rules somebody else's household. That's not talking about kids that are in a different household, that they've grown and they've left father and mother and they've started a new family. This is talking about kids that are a part of his own household. I can't control what my grown kids do. I shouldn't even want to try. I want to impact them positively and be a good influence and be there to help them and all the things you would say. But I don't make decisions for them. They're grown, they're married. Their husbands are in charge of that now. You see what I'm saying? So this is looking at what does a man do with his kids when they're a part of his household. How well has he led them? It's not about how well do I get to lead your household? No, it's not my household. Am I held responsible for how well I lead your household? No, it's not within my realm of authority as a leader in the family context. Now you understand an elder's leadership in his home. How did he handle the kids when they were under his authority? That's what we're looking at. And that's how you answer the question when the man's, his kids are all grown and you're saying, is he qualified? You have to back up in time and say, how well did he lead those kids when they were under his authority? With deacons, it's just ruling their children in their own house as well. He doesn't go into the added detail. That sort of backs it back down to just you're looking at a guy that's a good family guy. Okay? So it's a little easier to make that discernment, isn't it? What about blameless? Now this illustrates the concept I mentioned earlier where I don't want to look at these qualifications as a list of disqualifications. Here's what I mean by that. I can take that word blameless and I can say, that means nobody can blame them for anything. Okay. Was Jesus blameless? Yeah. Was there people all over town that said that he was a terrible person and guilty and did a bunch of bad things? Yeah. Well, they had to lie to do it, but yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be careful with that idea of blameless, and I'm going to understand that doesn't just mean nobody's ever made a false accusation. Okay, well, but Jesus was perfect, but nobody else is, so all right. Was Peter blameless? You go home and read the 4 Gospels if you've got time, and when you make a list, if you want to do this, and when you get through, you'll have a list of things that Peter did wrong. We could blame him from now to the landlook level and have plenty to talk about. What did Jesus say to Peter on the seashore after his resurrection? Shepherd my sheep. That sounds a lot like an elder to me. What did Peter say about himself in 1 Peter 5? As he wrote to elders, he said, I'm telling you what to do because I also am an elder. Peter was an elder. He wasn't perfectly blameless, but when we look at Peter, when we do find mistakes, he worked through those and he grew past it. And he did better, and no, he wasn't a perfect man, but on a relative scale, he was an honorable man, we might say above reproach. Philippians 2 says we're all supposed to be blameless, that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation among whom you shine as lights in the world. So that standard of blameless for the elder, that applies to you and me as Christians. Well, I have faults, you have faults, but our blamelessness is in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. We are to be above reproach when you compare us to the world that's around us. And that's the quality we're looking for when we look at that quality in a potential elder. Is he above reproach in his conduct and manner of life? He's told to be sober. One passage uses the word grave. They're very similar terms. The word that's translated sober in the Greek is just like our English word sober. Sometimes we use that word meaning sober like not intoxicated. Sometimes we use that word meaning a serious frame of mind. It kind of carries both meanings, and you can kind of get that connection because if somebody has a serious frame of mind, they're looking at life as though they're not, their judgment's not compromised by drunkenness. Okay? They're being serious about serious things. And that word that's translated that way in the Greek means the same thing. So, yeah, we're looking for a guy that doesn't have a drinking problem. Got that. But we're looking for a guy that's able to be serious about serious things, that has a way of looking at life. Okay? He is of good behavior. I think we can understand that. That's someone, they're not perfect, but they act well. Not given to wine. There's the idea there of enslavement to the beverage. They're not someone that abuses wine or strong drink. Not a striker. The newer translations don't use the word striker because in our language today, when you talk about a striker, you might be thinking labor disputes. He's talking about physical violence. You don't want somebody that physical violence is kind of their go-to solution for problems. And you think, well, but that's never going to be a problem. I'm sorry, I've lived a long time and seen a lot. I'm just going to tell you a story with kind of vague details to sort of be appropriate in the way I tell this. But I remember going into a community and working, and the church is there, and there's some struggles, and there's an issue of a reputation in the community, and come to find out, one of the elders got in a quarrel with somebody in this small town and hit a guy in the head with a shovel. Probably be better if we didn't have that, y'all. Look, he didn't go to bed a well-controlled man one night and wake up the next day saying, I think I'm going to solve all my problems of beating people in the head with a shovel. That's not what happened. He had a problem already that when things got difficult, he was inclined to resort to violence. And so we shouldn't be surprised when he brought that level of embarrassment on the church. That's a very unfortunate thing. You put that in a small town, it's really bad, because let me tell you something, that got from one edge of the city to the other at a high rate of speed. And it just looked awful. So we're looking for a guy that he's got control of his temper. He's not resorting to violence. That's a moral, ethical character. He's not greedy. Look, a godly man takes care of his family. That means there's ambition and all those kind of things that we applaud in Christian manhood. But his quest for success is for his family's sake and for God's sake. It's not for his selfish desires. There's a difference between a man who's conscientiously taking care of his family versus a man who's just given over to, I want more, I want more, I want more. Patient. When you lead people, you've got to be able to be patient. And patience does not mean idleness and doing nothing. It means doing what you can to help it, but understanding it may take time to get where you want to be. Just, that's just a sense of fairness and justice. Okay? And you can imagine how a man, leading in the church, who do you trust? Who do you turn to? I mean, there are brothers in my life that I turn to if I have a question or a need, or I need encouragement, or, I want their prayers or something like that. And that's the kind of people, that I turn to, are people that exhibit these qualities. And I didn't sit down and write a list and say, okay, here's the list. That's just naturally who I'm drawn to. So who's a congregation going to follow and submit to? These kind of men, okay? What about holiness? He just lives a set-apart life. It's kind of similar to blameless in the sense that you look at him and you look at the world and you see he's living set apart from the world. Temperate, that's self-control. He's not just in control of his temper, he's in control of his other passions and drives, and he lives an ordered, disciplined life. He's not soon angry. He's got a good reputation. You know, I told you kind of a vague story about a guy whose reputation wasn't great, and it hurt the church. He's a lover of good men. You know, if you're not careful, you get to a certain point in life, you kind of become cranky. And you get to where you're against everybody and everything if you let the news headlines get you down. Okay? We're looking for a guy who appreciates good people. How are you going to lead people if you can't stand to be amongst people? You find guys that are good leaders in the church, they love to be with people in the church. Think about that. Not double-tongued. That's said for the deacons. Let's think about some work skills. Being vigilant. That means watchful. You know, we say, well, they're holding vigil. That means they're taking time to stop their busy life and think about something, or maybe have a memorial about some tragedy that happened. So holding vigil, that's vigilant. That's a watchfulness, okay? As you think about it, elders are shepherds, and shepherds have to watch the flock. You've got to watch for wolves coming in. And out there in the real world, a wolf looks like a wolf. But the Lord's word warns us that in the spiritual world, a wolf can be dressed like a sheep. So this has to be a guy that's not gullible. He's not easily duped. His head's on a swivel. He's watchful. I don't mean he approaches everybody with a sinister suspicion. That's no way to live. But he approaches people with a watchfulness of, he's just willing to see the signs when they're there that, hey, this is a problem. Okay? Because he's watchful for the flock. Let's look at shepherding in the Old Testament to get a flavor of the value of this. Here he's protesting the leaders in Israel in Isaiah's day, and he says his watchmen are blind. They're all ignorant. They're dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yea, they are greedy dogs which can never have enough. They are shepherds that cannot understand. They all look to their own way, everyone for his own gain from his quarter. Boy, that's not a very flattering description. This makes me think of times, you know, in my work through the years. Get the picture in your mind with me. You know, I'm coming up to this house to make a visit or do a Bible study or something like that. And you look over there under the porch and there's this dog laying there. And I'm trying to decide, okay, is the fight about to be on, or does that dog even care if I exist, or what's about to happen? And they smell you before they see you. So he knows you're coming. Even if he's asleep, he knows you're coming. Okay? And you walk down the sidewalk, and I've got one eye on that dog and one eye on the front door. And that dog's laying there, and he cocks one eye open and looks at you, and now is the telling moment. What's fixing to happen next? And the best thing you can see there is that eyelid gets real heavy and just slams shut. He's back asleep. That dog is a great dog, but he's not a good watchdog, okay? He's insulting these men because they were ignorant, they were gullible, they couldn't bark. You know, what I'm telling you about is just some good old lazy old hound dog. And I look at that dog as I go on to the door, and he's too lazy to even bark. I mean, he can't even muster a low growl because there's way too much sleeping to be had, you know, to be worrying about business like that. And that's the picture that he invokes to describe a shepherd that God has such contempt for because he's not watching and being protective of the flock. That's why that elder needs to be vigilant. He needs to be given to hospitality. And that's used in both places, listing the qualifications. The longer my wife and I work together in, you know, our work with me being an evangelist, the longer it's evident to me what a great tool hospitality can be in your work. In the last few years, we've always used our home, to host people and studies or, whatever. We've used our home to just welcome guests that needed a place to stay. And in the last few years, that's just increased. And it's not because we sat down and said, hey, let's do more of this. It just organically happened. And nowadays, there's long stretches where I do way more Bible studies with people in our home than I do in other places. And it's not because I planned it, it just worked that way. And here's what I'm trying to get at. Hospitality is a priceless tool in working with people and trying to help people, whether you're trying to reach the lost or whether you're trying to encourage people that are saved. And a man has to be skilled at being hospitable, and he's got to love it, because that's a necessary weapon in his arsenal of things to use in his shepherding work. He is a capable teacher. Titus 1 says, holding fast the faithful word as he's been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. Timothy says just apt to teach in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 2. So one of the long-standing questions is, well, what does it mean that an elder has to be able to teach? And I've heard some say, well, if he teaches by setting a good example, that's enough. Titus 1 and verse 9 is more than just setting an example. That's a guy that knows the word well, and he can use the word by sound doctrine. That word means teaching. He can, by his verbal teaching, exhort. You do not just exhort with your example. You exhort by the things that you say. This is a guy that knows the word, and he has command of his ability to convey what he knows about the word to others. In this case, it's protecting the flock against a threat. But it can also be helping the flock that are struggling, and being able to skillfully teach them in a way that spiritually aids them. You can't do his work without having that skill. Holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. When you look at the qualities of a deacon, he does not require that they be able to teach. There are great deacons out there that never give lessons at church, and that's just fine. But he's got to know the Word. And he's got to know the Word in a life that reflects he lives that Word. He has a pure conscience because he lives what he knows. So that's not exactly a teaching skill, but it is a knowledge of the Word, okay? Not a novice, he said in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 6. And that word translated novice means newly planted. Got a garden? I've got some things that's been planted for a while and they're doing pretty well. I've got some plants that are newly planted and they're young and they're tender, and they struggle when we get an enormous amount of pea-sized hail. And those who were at the study Friday night know that I was getting a blow-by-blow account on my phone from my wife about the hail that hammered our garden. And when I get home this afternoon, Lord willing, we'll assess the damage. But there's some plants that's been there a while and they're strong and they're going to be okay. But those young, new, tender ones, that's the ones I'm worried about. Okay? The guy's got to have some seasoning. He's got to have experience under his belt. And if he doesn't, pride can creep in. Oh, I've got this position of honor. They made me an elder. And because he's new, he hasn't been a Christian long enough to learn. We all better pay attention to fighting our pride constantly, or it'll get a hold of us. Pride will slip up on your blind side. Listen, you need to hear my racket. Pride will sneak up on you and get you by the throat before you know what happened. We have got to constantly be on the guard against our ego getting out of control. And for a congregation to trust someone enough to follow their lead, that's something that pays a heavy compliment. And this has got to be a man who's seasoned enough to be able to endure that level of compliment, okay? Because if pride gets a hold of him, he'll be trapped by the same thing that trapped Satan. And I'll tell you, if Satan can fall because of his pride, so can I, and so can you. So we need to be mindful of that. Not self-willed. My way or the highway, that dog will not hunt. Because, let's say you've got 3 or 4 elders that's shepherding a congregation of 100 members, just as an example. Those guys sit down together and they discuss plans and for their work and what are we going to do and how do we go about doing this. And Very often, they will all agree on the best thing to do, and very often, if you got 4 guys, you're going to have 4 different opinions. And they've got to be able to have a heart that lets them hammer that stuff out and come to something they can be united on once they exit that discussion and go and lead the flock. They can't go and lead with a divided front. They've got to be united. And that means, stick with your conscience. If it's a matter of conscience, stand on right and wrong, but you can't just, I think this is a better idea and it's got to be my way. It can't be that kind of a guy. Or he'll struggle in his work with his co-elders. I hope as we've discussed these things, you can see this quality of elder or deacon is not an accident. These are character traits that are born out of strong family life. And that's why we studied parenting this weekend. Because that creates the kind of environment that incubates the kind of man it takes to be able to serve the church as a leader or serve the church as a servant deacon. So think soberly about these things, study these qualities, and be ready for us when we come, Lord willing, in several weeks to continue our work. As we bring our services to a close, I want to offer an invitation. If you are not a Christian, we'd love to assist you in becoming a Christian. Or if as a Christian, you need the church to pray for you, we would be thrilled to help you in either way. If you'll come, have a seat on the front while we stand and while we sing.
We hope you enjoyed this teaching from God's Word. If there's anything we can do to help you in your walk with Christ, send us a message at facebook.com/CFCNWA. To find more sermons, look for us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and like our Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and God bless.